Welcome back. This is Dr. Vic, and I'm excited to have you here as we're going to get into all about kids glitch in their foundation. And we're really going to get into a lot of, one of the big things is we're going to talk a little bit here is going to be heavily on ADHD and getting into the essence of what really is it? And does it even exist? And getting into so much more. And I want to share with you how it's more of a neurological thing that's happening, more of a physical reflex problem than it is what we think they're just, they can't focus, right? How many times do we think that, when it comes to parents, you're looking at things as you want to stop treating your child's behavior, you really start looking at the biology and the neurology, the neurobiology. And because most kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, it's not that they're defiant or they can't focus, or it's like what really happens is they're literally trapped in their body that thinks it's still like a 4-month-old, an 8-month-old, and they're running on this 4-month-old, 8-month-old survival software. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with parents and my kid's ADHD. He's a teenager. He can't listen. 8-year-old. He's got ADHD. He can't focus. And I'm evaluating them, looking at their scans, and I go, does it happen where you're like telling him to do? Let's say he's walking away and he's going to get something out of his room, and you're like, hey, can you get this? Go do this and do that. And he comes back with maybe the last thing, if that, or maybe just the first thing. It's just like, oh, it aggravates me. I said, it's not your son's problem, right? So as a pediatric chiropractor, I'm going to be talking you down the neurological developmental ladder. Okay. We're going to talk about the neurological debt. We're going to get when your child can't sit still and how we fix this from the spine up, how we look at it from a brain focused perspective, and to really help with that process. Okay. So when we're looking at development, I want you to understand that the brain develops from the bottom up, back, forward. Okay. So it's from here back. If you're watching this in the video, I'm showing you in the back of my head. It works its way up and then it works its way forward. That's how it develops. Right. Now, there are things in the brainstem known as primitive reflexes. They're very important. Primitive reflexes, if you're watching on the video, my hand is horizontal. What this does, primitive reflexes get kids to go from horizontal to vertical. That is it. That is the main goal of these things. There's different other things that come in. Yes, I'm trying to keep this simple. And so we're going to call this the basement. All right. This is where survival and automatic movements happen. And if this is jam, the house is shaking, right? If the foundation isn't centered, this is going to affect a lot of different things. And so I want you to understand that primitive reflexes is the foundation to a lot of the stuff. And they should be integrated, which means turned off at a certain point, but they should be on at a certain point too. And there's different ones and different things that we want to see them turn on and turn off at certain points. And that lets us know their brain is developing the way it's designed to. And if it's not turning off like they're supposed to, brain is not. And this is why I talk about the 4-month-old kind of process. So when you understand the vestibular side, the primitive reflex side, that's the foundation, okay, or the basement. Or you can visualize a pyramid, and that's the foundation to that triangle. The next is the vestibular cerebellum region, okay? This is going to be the GPS. Balance, spatial awareness, knowing where it is in space, knowing that every joint's optimal position, and so many other things. This is going to get into hand-eye coordination and things along that nature. Mix of it a little bit. Actually, it gets into the third phase more. But just knowing where it is and having balance. Now, this takes us to then from vertical and then strengthening that vertical process. The third part of the triangle is going to be the ocular system, which is part more into the midbrain. And you can see I'm working my way up the back, right? We started from the brain stem, we got into cerebellum, and then now we're getting midbrain up in that area. And so this is the software, all right? This is eye tracking, sensory filtering. Now you can see how important sensory filtering is, right? What's an ADHD kid have? He's overstimulated, he's all over the place, taking in so much, getting distracted by sensory. We'll get more into this. And so what happens in this phase is where eye tracking, hand-eye coordination, more importantly, comes in at this phase. And then we have the cortex, which is the top floor of the brain. And this is reading, math, and emotional control. Language comes in here. Emotional stuff here, I said already. But language will come into this process. So these are the 4 building blocks, if you want to call it, of brain development. And here's the interesting thing. When one, it doesn't do well, all the rest are disrupted. I want you to understand that. And it doesn't matter what phase it is. But one, if the primitives are not fully, 100% moving on to next level at 100%, let's say it's 90, you start at the next level. Your child's starting neurodevelopment-wise at 90% at that level. And then usually we'll see more deficits. So like for an example, in my grading system I do, anytime I have a kid I'm working with who's of the age of like 3.5, 4, we'll grade postural reflexes just because they usually last around. Some we can do early on, and I'll talk more about these in a second. But whatever it may be, usually the primitive reflex score, let's say it's at an 80, but the postural reflex score will be like at a 62. And the mom's like, wow, why is that one worse? And I'm like, well, building block process. And I give them this information to understand that a little bit more. But the thing is, you cannot tutor a brain out of a reflex problem. You have to go back to the basement, right? Because what happens is these things, if they don't turn off like they're supposed to, usually it's going to be in the birth process. However, the birth process was in labor is going to dictate a lot of that stuff. If it was very traumatic, we're going to see a lot more things go on. I'm going to talk some specific reflexes that we'll see in that process. Things just don't, their nervous system is stuck in that sympathetic state. And this is critical why it's important to see a chiropractor immediately after a baby's born, if you can, up to 2 weeks if you want to wait a little bit, because we can start changing that brain development to get it more into a more development state, getting that nervous system stuck out of stress and so much more. And so, as we said before, it's when you have that, you can't, when we talk about the primitive reflexes, if you're having these automatic movements be jammed, the house is shaky, right? It just can't. We're not getting to that foundation process. Things aren't going the way they should. And so the key moment here is we want to work our way through these things. So I'm going to get into some reflexes here to give you just a little bit of what it is, when it should turn off, and then what do we do in that process? So one of the ones that we see a lot with kids, and here's the thing. It's right around 4 months old. They start waking up in the middle of the night, usually crying, startled, and it becomes a pattern. And parents will go, oh, it must be that 4-month sleep regression that we're seeing. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But what I have noticed with kids who have like a real severe part of that, this reflex is still on. Because right at 4 months, this should turn off, known as integrated. And this is known as the Moro or startle reflex. This is why you swaddle a baby. If you do swaddling, we've never done that with our kids, so I like to keep them moving. But for some, they like to swaddle. And one of the reasons why is they have the startle reflex. And you're trying to not let them, you want them to take a good nap, and you want to put them in the bassinet. If you do that, and so forth, and you're making sure that they don't wake themselves up from simple movement, which will startle them. Okay. What happens is the startle reflex is a constant fight or flight. It's high cortisol. It's dilated pupils. It's anxiety, okay? This is the reflex that mimics ADHD, because think about that. And this is that reflex that if it stays on, this is what we'll see. Because in the startle reflex stays on because of a traumatic birth. And this is just my own experience. I have not seen someone who's had a traumatic birth. There's a percentage of what I'll see the Moro reflex stays on. And that tells me that their nervous system isn't fully in a growth state. It's more in a protective survival. So this is one of the biggest reasons why reflexes will stay on. Notice I said it was the birth process, but it's really the nervous system and the state of the nervous system. Because chiropractically speaking, 50-something% of the time, again, my experiences and data that I've collected and seen, because I used to practice just chiropractic, and I would see about 50-60% of the time, we could turn off these reflexes. And then we'd have to do work on some of the other ones. But the Moro reflex, if your child, this is what we're going to see. Again, they're going to be in a constant fight or flight. They're very stressed. They're very stimulated. If you look at their eyes, their pupils are dilated most of the time. That's another sign, right? They have anxiety. They have anxiousness, high cortisol. These are what we're going to see with these kiddos that have the Moro reflex. Now, the second reflex that we'll usually see that stays on, this is more of a posture reflex, but it's called the ATNR reflex, known as the fencer. So if you're watching this on video, Your kid will turn their head to the left as an infant, and they raise their legs straight. They straighten out their left arm. They bend their right arm. Now the knees do the same thing. Knee goes bent on the left side, straight on the right. It's a fencer stance. Now this is very common. This is what we'll see. All right. So head turns, arm extends. This makes writing and reading physically exhausting if it's still on. ATNR is also very big on the hand-eye coordination, posture disturbances as we can possibly see with this, because things are just firing they shouldn't be. I test a lot of adults with this, and it's amazing how many have it still on. It's so subtle, but it's there. I was even working with a lactation consultant's son, and it was fascinating because I was about to do the test, and she's looking at me, and she goes, "You're doing ATNR?" And I'm like, "Yep, I'm doing ATNR." And then she saw it in her son. I said, "Just, you know what to look for." I said, "I don't know if you know what to look for in an adult," but I showed her, and she goes, "Yep," and that makes sense. And then I shared, this is what can happen. Here's what's happening neurologically. Here's what's happening this. And she's like, "Oh my goodness." And so it's one of those things where when this stays on, this, again, they can get writing and reading. It can get very, very exhausting for them. So is it an ADHD issue? They can't focus. They don't want to read. They read something they don't remember. Now there's other things going on. And like I said, I can't tell you how many adults I see this still on in some way. Then we have the third one. Now this one, so I had a break in practice for a little over 2 years. I do business coaching, and when I made my move from Chicago to the Knoxville area, I took a break from chiropractic. I thought I wasn't going to go back in, missed it. I'm back in. But long story short, what I find interesting is I will tell you that majority of the kids I see have this reflex on. Now I don't know if it's COVID, because there's an age range that I'm seeing it in roughly. And it's still on. And this is known as a spinal galant. And this is when you get the wiggler. This is a kid, when you have the spinal galant reflex still on, their nervous system is hyper stimulated. So what that means is this. Here's stimulation, right? This is the level of where they're going to be overstimulated. Here's where they are functioning in their nervous system every day. So look how much, there's not a lot of room. If you're looking at this on video, I'm only showing a couple inches of a difference. It doesn't take much for them to be overwhelmed. These are kids that have they have oral fixations. They have a lot of tension in their nervous system. Moro Reflex can do that too, but they have a lot of tension in their nervous system. These are kids that usually, if they're boys, I see it mostly in boys, they're bedwetters. So most of my bedwetting kids have this. The second thing is, though, we see is they don't sleep well at night. They just wake up in the middle of the night. And may wake up early in the night. These are what I'll constantly see. And so here's the thing, though. Any touch to the back triggers a hip wiggle. This is a fidgety child who can't stay seated and stay in their seat. This was me as a kid. I used to have to shake my leg all the time so I could stay calm and focus. It was the weirdest thing how I had to do things. And of course, my parents didn't understand. My dad's like, "What are you nervous? Relax." And it's like, yeah, Dad, that's not what I needed. But at the same token, they don't understand this stuff. And so it's the wiggly kid, the one who just can't stay still, has to constantly keep moving, has to constantly keep doing things. So this is the three main. Now there's other reflexes we look at, and there's other things that can play a role, but I wanted to pick three that are really going to connect to the symptoms of what ADHD is. Okay. So let's get into then, we talked about the reflex side. That's the primitives. There's some things we look at there. Let's get into now midbrain, right? So we're going to get into the bridge, and this is your vestibular and your ocular systems, right? So balance, coordination, hand-eye coordination, tracking with the eyes, and so forth. So this is the static GPS of what we like to call it. And so what happens here is that it's like, from a chiropractic perspective, C1, the nerve at C1 plays a huge role in the vestibular system. Cranials play a huge role in the vestibular system also. And I'm not speaking craniosacral work. Cranial work itself is something that we do. But what it does is that tension up there will create a ton of static, not only in the vestibular system, but in the nervous system overall. And this will start to not have good hand-eye coordination. I had a kiddo who parents brought him in because I was seeing his older sister, and one day the parents were like, "We want to bring him in because we've seen him running and it did not look pretty." And I was like, "What do you mean? Was he flapping his arm, rotating this and that?" And they're like, "Oh my God, yes, all of that." And I was like, "Mm-hmm." Like, they're like, "It seems like you know already what's going on." I'm like, "Pretty much. Let's see what shows up though." And we went through it, and it was everything I expected. And it's one of those things where you get that static, the vestibular system, the coordination and the balance, it can be disrupted in some way, shape, or form. And C1, C2, the occiput, the skull itself, that is a critical area, especially for kids. There's a lot of neurological input. There's neurological things that happen. It helps relax the nervous system. It helps calm the nervous system, shift the nervous system more into a growth and development, the brain more into growth and development when it's fully clear and functioning without that static, that noise that's going on. Okay. Then we get to the ocular stress. And this is when your eyes can't track independently of the head. The child makes their struggle until they hit the third grade wall. And this is what happens where it can be reading and tracking. And the way the head, we have a writing reflex. If I tilt my head, if I lean to this way, my head will come this way and my eyes will stay that way. The other reflex is if I turn my head, if I'm looking this way, if I turn, if you notice my eyes are staying straight, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything for it. That's a reflex. Okay. So imagine they don't have that reflex properly on, and now all of a sudden, the vestibular-ocular reflex is not firing well. They get eye fatigue. I used to do that. I had this as a kid. I would have headaches in my head from trying to read. I was such a slow reader, and it was so painful to read. So it's one of the things where you say, "Oh, they can't read. They can't remember anything." Well, they got eye strain going on. It's interfering with the process. And so it makes their struggle the masses are struggle, and they can mask it up to a certain point, but it will show up, and it usually shows up a little later. Third grade is usually that wall we'll kind of see when that happens, right? So we're just kind of showing you the process of how this stuff continues to build. And then we get into, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this, the pain of inaction, of not doing something, seeing these things and not getting them to a pediatric chiropractor, someone who specifically focuses on the nervous system and works with all these things. And what happens is we get this neurological debt. And the neurological debt is where kids don't grow out of anything. So I don't like when pediatricians say this, just wait, they'll grow out of it. And it's like, no, you don't grow out of nothing. They have colic, they'll grow out of it. I had a patient, 14-year-old, had herniated disc or a bulging disc, in his lower back. We did nerve scans at the time. We evaluated the nerve scans. His initial nerve scan showed there was nerve tension in the lower back, but did not show it was I think some blues and a couple reds. Red means severe. We did the adjustments. We did a re-exam, rechecked. He had black. That is so what black means, if you're half a point away more than severe, or 15,000 points away more than severe, it shows black. I look at mom and I checked the intake form earlier before she came in, and I didn't see it there. So I went to mom and said, "Hey, did he have colic when he was a baby?" And she looks at me and she goes, "He was the most worst colic baby ever, screaming, crying, hours and hours and hours." I said, "What'd you do?" She goes, "Nothing. The pediatrician said it would grow out of it." I said, "Well, here's a teaching moment." I was like, he didn't grow out of it. He compensated. And some of it just got worse. And she's like, "You're telling me the colic created that?" I'm like, no. Nervous system, I kind of broke down. There's some things here, but if I'm just going to speak linearly, the nerves in that area weren't functioning as well. And he had that. He grew out of it. The body compensated. All symptoms went away. He's fine. No, he's not. It's still there. And it showed up later. And now here's that weakness showing up as this. So it never went away. Okay, this is what we call that neurological debt. Burnout by age 12, shattered self-esteem, and chronic sympathetic dominance, anxiety. Now, 12 was a common age. We're seeing kids with anxiousness and anxiety now at 7, 8, 9. This is the price that happens when we don't take care of these things. It's revving that nervous system and putting so much stress on it that we got to work through that. And this compensation is also metabolically expensive. They're burning up 90% of their energy just to stay still, leaving only 10% for learning. They're not growing. This is from a neurological perspective. But then you have all these things that come up with their health, and a lot of people go to the holistic practitioner or a functional medicine practitioner, and they go do all these different tests, and they do muscle testing or something along those lines. And they're like, "Oh, they need this, this, and this," or they just needed that, or here's what the weakness is here. You have to understand the weaknesses are happening, the compensations, because of the nervous system and the neurological debt. And that's why those things are even showing up in the first place. And the key factor is you got to get them to a neurological focused chiropractor first. That's going to be the game changer for them, because what we're doing is we're taking brain and we're going back to the basement and we're getting that corrected and we're building up. At the same time, we're teaching the nervous system to regulate itself so the child can be more regulated, so they're not so stressed. And when we can do that, the body can function better overall. Now, after being at a chiropractor for a little bit, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, when we really start to give that nervous system a chance and that brain a chance to make these new connections, break away from the old habits and start to shift things. Now, if there's things still showing up, functional medicine is great. Muscle testing is phenomenal, but do that first, because sometimes it takes care of a lot of those issues. And so this is where, we get them out of this sympathetic nervous system dominance. I call it the gas pedal, stuck in gas pedal. So when you have sympathetic dominance, it's a constant state of stress. It's happening on and on and on. And that just builds and builds and builds, and it builds more of a neurological debt. And what we do is we get them to more parasympathetic or brake pedal. We slow it down. That's where growth and development, self-healing, self-regulating mechanisms that are naturally built. You're designed to heal. You're designed to thrive. And that's the beauty of why, out of all the research I've done in health, chiropractic still shows up as the most powerful thing you do for your health and overall well-being. If there was something better, I'd be doing that instead of this. And so the thing is, chiropractic clears that static, okay? That static we talked about in there on the line. So those reflexes could eventually integrate and work with, and they stick. We, in my office, I would do integration work on top of it. I usually wait until the first re-exam, and then I'm going to do integration work if needed. Some kiddos, it still shows up in the same stats, 50 to 60%. We don't have to do anything. The nervous system's healing, the body's taking care of it, it's doing what it needs to do. 50%, give or take, they need the integration process. Or if they're going to see an OT, which I like working with OTs a lot, OTs will respond back and they'll be like, hey, I don't know what's going on. The last couple months, phenomenal changes. We're seeing shifts. Holy cow. And I'm like, great, let's keep doing it, because I already have someone there. That's the process when we look at this journey. And chiropractic is the thing that is the foundation to your child's health. And getting a family under chiropractic care, imagine if everyone's more regulated. How's family enjoying life more? That's the power, and that's why I became a chiropractor, and getting out there and sharing neuro-focused information that's going to help you. Neuroscience backed, so there's science behind what I'm sharing here to help your kiddo thrive in every aspect of their life. Because when we can do this and we can get the nervous system more regulated, we can turn off these reflexes to be integrated. That's the term we use for turning off. Their nervous system and their brain now is catching up to where they are in age. And then they can function and adapt better. They're still going to have stresses. They're still going to have, kids are going to still be kids, but they can regulate better. And we know one thing for sure is we're keeping their nervous system being optimal and staying in a state of healing and thriving. And when we can do that, these kids return back to the natural essence of who they are, which is happy, healthy, and vibrant. So if you are in the Knoxville, Morristown, or Maryville area, reach out to us. Information's in the show notes. Send us a text if you have questions about any of this stuff. If you're not in the area and you're listening to this podcast, send us a message. We have a huge network, and we can refer you to someone who is a pediatric neuro-focused type of chiropractor, which they're going to look at that nervous system. They're going to look at these kind of things and help change that kind of a process. So that's what I got for you guys this week. I appreciate for tuning in. As always, subscribe, like, share this, text the link over, share it with someone who you know can benefit from this, who may have an ADHD kid, or maybe they're thinking that they do, or maybe they just have a kid who doesn't focus well, and they're going, I may need some help here. Or maybe they do think they have that, and you've had these conversations and dialogues. Send them this podcast to help them understand that ADHD is not, it's a term that I don't actually agree with, because let's say a kid has ADHD, he's been diagnosed, but yeah, let's say it's a boy, because it's most of the time them, and you put them in a video game, they can focus hardcore. They can tell you more things about the game than you could ever possibly even see and imagine. And so they had focus there. So that tells you there's something else there. And I shared you the foundation to it all, to what we can make these changes. Because even for myself, a former ADHD person, not anymore. I do talk a little faster. Maybe it's where I'm from. But overall, the anxiety, the anxiousness, the hyper-stimulated, easily stimulated, overstressed nervous system, it's not there anymore. And so That's the reality I know that's happened for me. And I didn't get into this till I was 19. So imagine getting your kid in sooner, what we can see, what the changes will make into the future of how more resilient they'll be to stress and not be overstimulated and stay more in a centered place. It's a game changer in every facet of their life. So share that with someone you may know. Appreciate you as always. I'll see you guys on the next one.